And so we've been spending a lot of time at these wonderful kids' birthday parties. And for the most part, I am super grateful for the village that we surrounded our kid around, that most of the parties are pretty low key, they're pretty low, like there's not a lot of like fancy stuff going on. They're just kids hanging out, having a good time. But then we've gone to a few of those parties. Those parties you've seen on TV, those parties that you maybe have gone to where, you know, your kid comes home with like the more presents than you brought to the family. Like we went to a party where Will came home with a hat and a fidget spinner and a whole bunch of other things. And I'm like, oh my goodness, we bought them a $20 gift. Like maybe we should have bought them a nicer gift. Or where they have like these fancy take-home things or like fancy cakes and elaborate things. And I think the reason for this is because that Pinterest has kind of exploded onto children's birthday parties. I think it's exploded onto weddings and all sorts of other things like that. But because of that, moms sometimes feel like they have to keep up with the Joneses. Now, I don't feel that necessary, not because I am so much better than anybody else, because if I did it, it would actually turn out like this, where I would make that thing and I would have nailed it. Or this, where it's beautiful, or that one, where you want to make the beautiful thing and then you nailed it. Or, oh, how many people have done this, where they tried to paint their nails and they ended up looking like a drunk person painting their nails? Or this one. Oh, this is my favorite one. Or this next one. Oh, that beautiful meal, how lovely. And it all runs out in the pan. Okay, admit it. How many of you have looked on Pinterest and tried something that it looks so beautiful and wonderful on Pinterest, and then you totally failed at it? I'm going to raise my hand. If I had 3 hands, I would raise them. So why do parents do this? Why do we do this? Why do we look at Pinterest? Why do we, can we just change the blank side, because that makes me so sad. Why do we do this? Why do we think we have to make all these beautiful things when the meal would be just fine if we just ate it? Why do we think that we have to keep up with John or Jane down the street? And I think it's because we've kind of lost focus about what's important. Because instead of caring for one another and being in a relationship with one another, we've been focused on competing with one another and trying to be better than the next person. So we're focused so on presentation that we forgot about relationships and forgotten about what birthday parties and gatherings are about. So, and kids understand what birthday parties are about, because how many of them are making their birthday party list from the time that their birthday party was over the year before? How many of them are inviting and disinviting people on the playground, even though their birthday is not for another year? Because they are, you were probably that kid on the playground too, because I know I was, who was like, you're not going to I'm mad at you, you're not going to my birthday party. Your birthday's after 6 months, who cares? But they get it, that relationship is the key to those birthday parties, that for them, it's about their friends being there and celebrating their birthday. And somewhere along the way, as we have become adults, we've forgotten that the relationship is the most important thing. We have become too paranoid about how much money we spend on things and how things look, instead of just being present with one another and being in a relationship with one another. We're so focused on presentation rather than relationship, how things look rather than getting to know one another, or how busy we are and how much work we did to put on this great party for our kid that they're only going to remember the fact that they played tag with their dad. Those are the things that they're going to remember. And for adult parties, when was the last time you went to a wedding or a dinner party and you said the one thing you came away with was, the centerpiece was so beautiful? Can any of you even remember the last wedding you went to that you thought that you're still thinking about the centerpiece? No, you're thinking about that inside joke that you now have because of the silly thing that the bride said, or because of the relationship between the mother and the bride, or some funny thing that happened, or some significant conversation that you had with someone. You're not thinking about the centerpiece or the food. You're thinking about the relationship and the occasion that happened around that. So last week, we started this series called For Oceanside. And this week, we're going to be talking about what it means to be for our neighbors. And we're asking ourselves, what if we, as just our own personal human beings, but also we as a church, were really for Oceanside? What if we were about building relationships instead of just looking good on the outside? What if we were seeking to be like Christ instead of seeking recognition for ourselves? Because really being for Oceanside is really about being for people. It's about being for relationship with people. It's about being for our neighbors, for those who have yet to come to know Jesus. And in order to do that, we are going to have to be different as a church. We are going to have to change. I whisper that because it's a dirty word within the church. We're going to have to change. We are going to, instead of being inward focused on what we get out of church and the things we love about church, we're going to have to focus on what it means to be a church for Oceanside. So that when we are describing our church, we're not describing the fact that it's next to the cemetery, but we're describing it, it's true, but we're describing it that people will know Oceanside Press is a church that is for our neighbors, that is for Oceanside, that they've joined together with Jesus. And what Jesus did when he was hanging out with people, when he was teaching people, when he was spending time with them, what was he doing? He was getting to know them. He was learning about who they were and teaching them from the place they were at. Not from the place he wanted them to be at, but from right where they were. And he said, let's learn together, let's grow together, let's be in relationship together and move forward in faith together. So our passage today, one day Jesus had been out with his friends, he'd been out teaching, and he was on the road to Bethany, and on the road to Jerusalem, and on the way to Jerusalem, there is a town called Bethany. And in that town of Bethany, he went to visit two of his friends, Mary and Martha. Now, these are two very familiar sisters, and it's a very familiar story. So I want you guys to really have open hearts to hear what God would teach you today from this passage. So we're going to be reading from Luke's Gospel, the 10th chapter, beginning at the 38th verse. Now, they went on their way. This is Jesus and the disciples. They went on their way, and he, Jesus, entered into a certain village where a woman named Martha welcomed him into her home. She had a sister named Mary who sat at the Lord's feet and listened to what he was saying. But Martha was distracted by her many tasks. So she came to him and asked, "Lord, do you not care that my sister has left me to do all of the work by myself? Tell her to help me then." But the Lord answered her, "Martha, Martha, friend," that's added for emphasis. He didn't actually say that, but I think that's what he was saying. "You are worried and distracted by many things. There is need of only one thing. Mary has chosen the better part, which will not be taken away from her." So in our Southern California culture, we live in a culture of the closed garage. How many of you drive in your driveway, close the garage behind you, and you live behind your garage door? How many of you, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hands. We pull into our garages and we live our life behind closed doors. And this is something I've always hated about Southern California culture, because as a kid, growing up in Fresno, which is a great place to grow up and be from, but I love it here. But when I was a kid, I knew my neighbors. We were like in and out of each other's houses. We were in and out of each other's front yards and backyards, and we played with each other's toys and took each other's toys home. We knew their parents. We knew their parents were friends with our parents. We walked to school together. We were in each other's lives. But as I became an adult, I knew my neighbors, but I didn't know my neighbors like I knew my neighbors as a kid. I knew their names, I had conversations with them, I maybe knew their kids' names, but I didn't really know them. And even after George and I got married, we were living in Solana Beach, and we lived in this small complex that didn't have very many homes in it, but I don't really know any of my neighbors. And we were both commuting to work at the time, 25 minutes to Solana Beach, and I was working late hours, he was working late hours, and we really didn't have any good friends that lived close by, that you didn't have to drive 25 minutes to see them. And when I was pregnant with Will 5 years ago, I was like, goodness gracious, this is not a way to live. Like, I don't think I want my kid to not know our neighbors. I don't think I want this. And so I wanted neighbor relationships because I thought they were so important. So 4.5 years ago, we moved to Carlsbad. We live in southern Carlsbad, and I promised myself, we moved into a brand new home, and everyone else's homes were brand new. So there were 33 homes that were built in our community, and I promised myself, I said, I'm gonna know every single one of my neighbors' names. I'm gonna know their kids' names. I'm gonna get to know their stories. And then we were extra blessed because everyone on our cul-de-sac has a son that is around Will's age. So we have been able to create this community for our kid. We've been blessed by God to create this community for our kid where we are in and out of each other's houses all the time, and we really are for our neighbors. But it's still, I'm gonna admit, that it took time and intention, and it took dealing with the naughty neighbor who is like mean to everyone but us, thank God. And it took intentionality to be for our neighbors. Now, we are not so great. I know a lot of you guys are doing this. I know a lot of you guys. I've been in your homes. I've met your neighbors. You've brought them to church. I've been in your homes and met your neighbors. So you guys are already doing this. And I want to thank you all for doing this. But I also know that for many of you, you are kind of the garage door people. And that's okay too, because I get it. We are so busy and distracted by our lives that we forget to be intentional about our neighbors. We forget to be intentional about building relationship with other people because we're so busy. And so how many of you, again, I'm not going to make you raise your hand, when someone asks you how you're doing, do you first tell them, great, and then you list the litany of all of the things that you're super duper busy with? I'm guilty of this. I apologize for all the times that I've said that to any of you. But we've been so busy busying ourselves that the busyness has become the important thing. The busyness has become the relationship. And we've forgotten that it's important to have relationship. It's important to know the people who are in our lives. It's important to genuinely know them, to know their names, to know their kids, to know to share those things with them, all those things that it means to be in relationship. So this was the deal with Martha, that she was so busy with the busyness. She was so busy with entertaining and making sure that the meal looked perfect. I'm sure she wanted, Jesus was in her house. The Lord and Savior was in her house. I'm sure she wanted like the perfect meal with the perfect sauce and the perfect bread and the perfect fill in the perfect wine. Fill in whatever thing you would fill in to have the perfect party. And she was so distracted by the busyness of it that she forgot that Jesus was in her house. She forgot that the Lord and Savior was in her house. Now, I do want to say that this is not a deal of like Martha's the bad one and Mary's the good one, because Mary probably should have helped her sister a little bit. But Mary chose the good. She chose the good because she stopped being distracted by all the things she could have been doing, and she chose to be in relationship with God. She chose to be in relationship with Jesus. She said, I'm putting this relationship first. And she actually was more hospitable to Jesus than Martha was, because it wasn't about how the meal looked or making sure that everything was perfect. It was about the relationship. Martha could have made a simpler meal. Martha could have asked her sister for help instead of sniping at Jesus to get Jesus to help, to get Mary to help her. She was so busy with the busy work that she was resenting her sister because she wanted to be sitting at Jesus' feet. She wanted to be getting to know Jesus in this beautiful way. And then she makes this speech, this really snotty speech that she makes to Jesus. And do you know that she says the word me or myself 5 times in like 3 sentences? Like, oh, why won't Mary help me? Why can't you make her help me? I'm doing this all myself. Her focus was on herself rather than focusing on the relationship. And there's the rub. There are times when the work overcomes the relationship, where the work means that we stop being hospitable. The work means that we stop focusing on our guests. The work means that we stop focusing on Jesus. Because when hospitality is busy focused, it's focused away from Jesus being Lord and guest. But when we focus on Jesus and our focus on Jesus is that sole purpose, we realize that Mary did choose the good, because Mary chose the relationship first. So what does it mean to be for our neighbors? What does it mean to be for Oceanside? And I think it means first sitting at the feet of Jesus and coming to know who Jesus was and who Jesus was in the lives of people and in our lives. And realizing that he was focused on the relationship, not the presentation. Because the most important thing about hospitality is relationship. It's about building common connection. So how are we going to be the church that is for Oceanside, the church that is for our neighbors? It means that we first have to take those first steps to get to know our neighbors. And by first getting to know our neighbors, I mean just in our neighborhoods first. And then I mean our Fire Mountain neighbors. What would it be to ask our Fire Mountain neighbors what they need? How we can serve them rather than how we can serve ourselves. How we can be in relationship with them. How we can sit at the table with them. Be present with them. Because what if we've been distracted by the wrong things? What if we've been distracted by the busying of ourselves, that we've actually stopped doing the work of Jesus? I'm not saying we have. I'm saying, what if we have? What if instead of building genuine relationships with God's creation, with the beautiful, wonderful, incredible people that God has created, what if we've just been busying ourselves with stuff? What if we got to know those people who have yet to know Jesus? What if we got to know those people who have felt judged and unloved by the church, who have felt that they are on the outside? Because people are looking for a genuine faith. They are looking for something, but maybe they have yet to come to know Jesus. Maybe they have yet to be in relationship with a Christian who is just loving on them, who just wanted to know them instead of proselytizing to them, who just wanted to share the love of Jesus with them, who just wanted to slow down and be in relationship with them. Someone who wasn't distracted, someone who took the time. Last week at our Mothers of Preschoolers group, we watched this video, and this woman was talking about one of her friends and one of the things that she had taught him. And so her friend had decided for 30 days to take the slow lane. Now, if you're like me, unfortunately, my family calls me Leadfoot Lizzie. I do not really know how to take the slow lane, but So this was really convicting to me, because he took the slow lane. And by taking the slow lane, I mean he didn't just drive in the slow lane in traffic. He took the slowest lane in the grocery store. He made sure that he talked to every person who served him. He made sure that he was trying to build relationship with his neighbors. And he said he did this because he wanted to truly be present, to truly be in relationship and experience all the people that God had created and all the people that God had placed in his path. But he'd been so busy that he had ignored the people in his path. Now, I'm going to admit that this would be very hard for me. I'm challenging myself to do it just as much as the rest of you to do it, because I'm usually running at like 100 miles an hour. I'm never in the slow lane. I get frustrated when I have to look for a parking spot at Costco. You know what I'm talking about. I am always running from one place to another, usually in high heels. And I realize that when I take time to stop and wait and sit and pause, that those are the times that God is revealed in my life. Those are the times that I see God at work in the people who are around me. That's the time that I realize that Christ's love is so much bigger than I could ever imagine, and I want to share that. So I want to challenge us to be a church that stops being so busy and distracted by the wrong things. A church that is like Mary, who takes the time, who sits in the presence of Jesus, sits in the presence and relationship of other people, and who is willing to say, I'm going to be for you. I'm going to be for my community. I'm going to be for what Christ would have me do. Let's pray.